Hello everyone. Imagine in your backyard there's a really good resource. And this resource is the one and only highly sought after oil. And so what does this oil attract? It attracts a lot of companies, large companies and corporations that want to come take this oil. And what are they doing about taking this oil? They're coming into your backyard and they're destroying your backyard, polluting it, filling it with chemicals. And what does this do? This destroys your land, it destroys your family members, it destroys everything. So now, let's talk about the case of Stephen Donziger versus Chevron, which regards this great thing called oil.
In 1964, Texaco discovered oil in the northeastern Amazon located in Ecuador. And from 1967 to 1992, Texaco conducted drilling while ignoring waste regulations and dumped 16 billion gallons of toxic wastewater into rivers and pits, which polluted streams, groundwater, and farmland. And in 1992, Texaco stopped oil production and abandoned the fields while leaving waste pits, destroyed land, polluted water, and causing cancer and birth defects in the locals in Ecuador.
And naturally, causing birth defects and cancer led the company to being sued on so many fronts. Lawyers were hitting up the lines every single day. And until Donziger accepted cases from about 30,000 people through his firm, Donziger filed a class action lawsuit against them in New York. Having it done in the States gave the lawsuit more power and held Chevron more accountable, which is why immediately after, 2 years later, 1995, Texaco staged a fake cleanup because they needed to fix their image. They were being held liable for too many of their mistakes, you know? They spilled 18 million? That's okay. They decided to clean up about 1% of the mess they made and say, reparations have been made, we should be forgiven for everything. And considering how much of a harm they actually did to the people of Ecuador, this didn't stand very well. So in 1998, they again lobbied for so much less liability. They paid politicians off, they paid news, they paid lawyers to start suing people who were going against them. Chevron even took interest because of this. They understood that Texaco was going to crash and become a shell of what it once was. So Chevron instead bought everything Texaco owned, which later happens. But this is when Chevron really shows their interest.
In the year 2000, Chevron and Texaco agreed to merge into one company, but they don't successfully merge until the year 2001, as well as Chevron wanting to move the trial into Ecuador because Ecuador has no jury, as well as being heavily dependent on the oil industries. The Ecuador also has a fair and competent legal system, but the trial doesn't fully start up until 2003. So in the year 2009, Chevron hires a law firm, Gibson Dunn, who has been censored for fabrication, witness tampering, intimidation, etc. And in the same year, the documentary Crude, The Real Price of Oil is released, which highlights the evils of Texaco and what they did in the Amazon. And then moving on to 2010, Chevron runs a campaign against anyone who is against them in the trial in response to the documentary. And on to 2011, Ecuador orders Chevron to pay $18 billion in compensation on behalf of the 30,000 victims. And then in 2014, Chevron appeals damage costs all the way up to the Ecuadorian Supreme Court, which leads to the cost to be reduced to almost half to $9.5 billion.
In the year 2015 and 2016, an individual named Alberto Guerrera, he came forward and he admitted that the testimony that he gave in the case was a lie. And his evidence in the case, or his testimony, I should say, actually was used to influence the Ecuadorian judgment. So, but this admission of guilt that was provided from Guerrera and all the evidence that proved that his admission of guilt was correct and everything else along the lines that showed that he was trying and people were trying to influence the Ecuadorian judgment, regardless of all that evidence, Judge Kaplan still affirmed the case and said Donziger was at fault. And then we're going to hop into the year 2018, where Donziger, in response to the matter with Kaplan and such, his law license was then suspended. And then that places him on house arrest while he's awaiting his trial.
So Donziger was placed under house arrest. And 2021 July rolls around and he was found guilty on criminal contempt. And that basically means the court found him guilty of lying to the court and trying to make things up to make Chevron look bad. But truthfully, he wasn't. So, Donziger's sentenced to 6 months in prison in October of 2021 after losing that, right? However, he's released from prison and sent to house arrest, where he spends over 700 days because Chevron won't leave him alone. It isn't until April 2022, 1 year ago, that he got released from house arrest, which was horrible to think about because he was fighting the good fight.